Professor Judy Salzman. She's asked me to do a reading from chapter 16 of the Gita. And now, let me close this one, if I dare. Alrighty, so I'm glad you can all hear me. So chapter 16, as Judy has requested, devotion through the discriminating between godlike and demoniacal natures. So we have a duality here, godlike and demoniacal. Krishna begins speaking in this chapter. Fearlessness, sincerity, assiduity in devotion, generosity, self-restraint, piety, and almsgiving, study, mortification, and rectitude, harmlessness, veracity, and freedom from anger, resignation, equanimity, and not speaking of the faults of others, universal compassion, modesty, and mildness, patience, power, fortitude, and purity, discretion, dignity, unrevengefulness, and freedom from conceit. These are the marks of him whose virtues are of a godlike character, O son of Bharata. Those, O son of Pritha, who are born with demoniacal dispositions are marked by hypocrisy, pride, anger, presumption, harshness of speech, and ignorance. The destiny of those whose attributes are godlike is final liberation, while those of demoniacal disposition born to the asura's lot suffer continued bondage to mortal birth. Grieve not, O son of Pandu, for thou art born with the divine destiny. There are two kinds of natures in beings in this world, that which is godlike and the other which is demoniacal. The godlike hath been fully declared. Hear now from me, O son of Pritha, what the demoniacal is. So now we have a quote. Those who are born with the demoniacal disposition of the nature of the asuras know not the nature of action nor cessation from action. They know not purity nor right behavior. They possess no truthfulness. They deny the universe has any truth in it, saying it is not governed by law, declaring it hath no spirit. They say creatures are produced alone through the union of the sexes, and that is all for the enjoyment only. Maintaining this view, their souls being ruined, their minds contracted, with natures perverted, enemies of the world, they are born to destroy. They indulge insatiable desires and are full of hypocrisy, fast fixed in false beliefs through their delusions. They indulge in unlimited reflections which end only in annihilation, convinced until death that the enjoyment of the objects of their desires is the supreme good. Fast bound by the 100 cords of desire, prone to lust and anger, they seek by injustice and the accumulation of wealth for the gratification of their own lusts and appetites. This today hath been acquired by me, and that object of my heart shall I obtain. This wealth I have, and that shall also be mine. This foe have I already slain, and others will I forthwith vanish. I am the Lord, I am powerful, and I am happy. I am rich with the precedence among men. Where is there another like unto me? Shall I make sacrifices, give alms, and enjoy? In this matter do not speak who are deluded, confounded by all manner of desires, entangled in the net of delusion, firmly attached to the gratification of their desires. They descend into hell. Esteeming themselves very highly, self-willed, full of pride, and ever in pursuit of riches, they perform worship with hypocrisy, and not even according to ritual, but only for outward show. Indulging in pride, selfishness, ostentation, power, lust, and anger, they detest me who am in their bodies and in the bodies of others. Wherefore I continually hurl these cruel haters, the lowest of men, into wombs of an infernal nature in this world of rebirth. And they, being doomed to those infernal wombs, more and more deluded in each succeeding rebirth, never come to me, O son of Kunti, but go at length to the lowest region. The gates of hell are three: desire, anger, covetousness, which destroy the soul, wherefore one should abandon them. Being free from these three gates of hell, O son of Kunti, a man worketh for the salvation of his soul, and thus proceeds to the highest path. He who abandoneth the ordinances of the scriptures to follow the dictates of his own desires attaineth neither perfection nor happiness nor the highest path. Therefore, in deciding what is fit and what unfit to be done, thou shouldst perform actions on earth with a knowledge of what is declared in Holy Writ. Thus, in the Upanishads, called the Holy Bhagavad Gita, is the science of the Supreme Spirit. In the Book of Devotion, in the colloquy between holy Krishna and Arjuna, standeth the 16th chapter by name, Devotion through discriminating between godlike and demoniacal natures. All right, with that, our presenter today, Professor Judy Salzman.
Okay, thank you very much, Ken. Okay, now what I want to consider are how many ways are we in the cave? And of course, we want to consider that how we get out of the cave, which Plato makes strong recommendations about, and so does the Bhagavad Gita. Now, first of all, I think many of you are familiar with the remarkable book by Professor Raghavan Iyer, Parapolitics Toward the City of Man. And having read The Republic and his book many times, I think I read The Republic 30 times before I realized it's not about politics, it's about the journey of the soul. And of course, this diagram has so much to say about that journey, but also about other things such as politics that affect the soul and are affected by the soul. Now, of course, the lowest stage is Acacia, where human beings are really trapped in an underground cavern, according to Plato's Allegory, and they are chained looking at images which are projected by a fire in back of them. And they don't even know that they're in a cave. They don't even know that they're only seeing images. They think what they see is real. So they're very deluded, and they're acting in a deluded way, perhaps violently toward each other. But they think of themselves as being very important and give each other awards. And then there's another stage of deceit, pistis, which is the root of the word epistemology, meaning theory of knowledge. And in Greek, it can be translated as faith, which it is in the Christian Bible, or it can be translated as knowledge. And of course, the preferred word, especially because of the influence of Christianity, is faith or believing here. At least when you get to a stage where you might be on a little higher level and think more of what your fellow man has to say, you're at least on your way out of the cave. You have a chance. And then, of course, the line here is really often called the divided line, because there is a kind of gap, which we call antaskarana, between the lower and the higher self. And of course, once one gets into the level of higher manas, mathemata or dianoia, dialectic, real thinking, when people start really thinking about the world, they realize that they were in a cave, that there is a real sun out there, which Plato calls the agathon, the symbol of the good. In fact, there's a famous saying in Book 6 of the Republic, As the eye is to the sun, the soul is to the agathon. In other words, without the sun, we would not have any eyes, but without the agathon, our souls would not exist, would not function. And of course, soul is central to Plato. Plato never posits any God above the soul. And of course, the final stage, noesis, can hardly be talked about, but I will try to talk about it anyway. The real stage of Ide, archetypes, in which the soul really is seeing ideas. He's really seeing what the ideas of, like the four Platonic virtues of wisdom, Sophia, and courage, and the other two being, I'm trying to recall a moment. At any rate, there are two other Platonic virtues, Sophrosine, which is prudence, and justice, dikaisone. So there are other forms than that, but there are also mathematical forms. So the soul knows directly what these are, whereas in the beginning of the Republic, then everyone is down here at the bottom. No one knows what justice is or truth or anything, and there's just a huge argument that goes on between people like Thrasymachus and other fellows who are denizens of the cave, and they don't know it. Okay, so I'm going to discuss the idea of these four categories in 7 different ways. Now, I haven't written these all out in detail, so I'm going to try to speak them clearly and slowly. And I know that some of you won't agree with the way I categorize them. In a way, it's kind of like what Professor Max Weber, the sociologist, called an ideal typification of these different states of being. Okay, so oh, wait a minute, this is out of order. Better get on that. I went, yeah, okay, Icasia. Okay, now we're really completely in the dark in Icasia. I mean, we may be seeing images the way a person watching television seems to think what's going on television is real. I can remember once a British actor saying a woman came up to him in London and berated him for having mistreated an Indian boy because he was on a television play. And he had to explain to her, they said, I'm an actor, madam, and this was simply a play. Naturally, I don't feel this way. But at any rate, 7 different ways. Now, the first way would be the body or personal. That I am this body. I'm living for me. I will do anything to satisfy my ambition. Well, almost anything. And incidentally, these things are things people have said to me or have been said in class by my students. Socially, okay, I am popular. My appearance is of maximum importance. I like to be around successful people. And of course, if I start to age, I'm going to get more talks. Okay, the political. No, I was once in Germany, and I had the man, I'm sure was an ex-Nazi, just scream at me, Wir brauchen einen starken Mann. We need a strong man to lead us. And of course, I got out of that taxi very fast. Okay, now someone who says, I want my country to be great. I do not want foreigners in my country unless they are servants. Now, believe it or not, I know people who have said these things. And of course, when I was a child, the city of Glendale didn't even allow black people to be on the street at night because they were allowed there only as servants. Of course, this was later overturned by the Supreme Court, and when it was challenged by someone who stood on the street corner until he got arrested. At any rate, law. Okay, now, like Thrasymachus says in the Republic, justice is the interest of the stronger. The law is used to help your friends and harm your enemies. The function of the law is to punish. When I was in the I House at UC Berkeley, I knew a number of law students, and I remember this young man saying he was going to law school and he wanted to be a judge, and that the function of the law was to punish. I hope he never became a judge. I said, what about justice? Well, that was secondary. Okay, religion. All right, now, my religion is better than your religion. If you do not believe as I do, you're going to hell. The end of the world is coming, and you're going to burn up in a lake of fire. Well, I go to heaven. Well, yes, I've had all this said to me. Maybe some of you experience science. Science proves that everything is matter and will dissipate at death, including human beings, the planet, the solar system, the sun, and eventually the universe. Spiritual, well, in terms of compassion, kindness, universality, it doesn't even exist when you're in this kind of a state. So at any rate, we can go next to another state. Okay, Pistis. Now, here's a state where the poor denizen of the cave finally sees something more. But he's got a long climb out of that cave. It almost looks like what Batman and the Catwoman had to do, the impossible. So, at any rate, he might begin to realize, however, that there is more than what he originally thought. He might personally, in this way, I will investigate the mind-body problem, which is often done in graduate schools. Caring for others, such as my family and friends, may make me happier. Worldly success may not make me happy. Social, I don't care if I'm popular. It's not so important to look good as to feel good. I turned in my high heels for Birkenstock, or I don't care if I'm a guy and I have long hair. Okay, so political. I want to elect a good leader, whether it be a man or a woman. I want my country to have a good economy. Foreigners can come here as long as they work and contribute. 4. Law. The function of law is to achieve justice, which protects the society. Sometimes capital punishment is necessary. The law should equally protect all. Religion. My religion is the best, but I want to learn from others. Although you don't believe as I do, you're not necessarily going to hell, because only God can judge. No one knows when the end of the world will come. Okay, this is a little more open than science. Imaginative scientists have shown the world has intelligent design. Quantum physicists suggest there may be a spiritual. Sometimes this type of thinker will take the latest scientific idea and apply his religion to it and say, the Big Bang somehow proves that there is a real creation by God and it's intelligent design. And I never could see that it was in any way valuable to take the latest scientific idea and apply an ancient scripture to it. but this has been done in just about every religion I know about at different conferences. Okay, finally, there's a spirituality here, at least, that God is going to take care of everybody, but he will discard the bad ones. God will favor those who are good to each other and reward them. Well, that's not very spiritual to be looking for a reward, but at least on this level, then someone at least has the idea that perhaps everyone should be included, even if they are different. Okay, now I'm going to have to go back to dianoia. So, excuse me from. Okay, dianoia. Einstein once said in a dialogue with Werner Heisenberg, of course, who was famous for the uncertainty principle, while Einstein was famous for the relativity principle. He said, I can't believe God plays dice with the world. Einstein, incidentally, had a copy of The Secret Doctrine on his desk. I know a man who spent the day with Einstein, and he saw the book, and he said it's by some Russian. What was her name? I said, H.P. Blavatsky, I'll give you a copy. At any rate, he was a physicist who was came to speak at Cal Poly. Okay, now when you get on the level of dianoia, you're at least out of the cave and that you're beginning to use your higher limits. In other words, you know some mathematics, you know some science, or you can at least reason. That's why over the entrance of Plato's Academy, it said, let no one ignorant of mathematics enter here. I probably couldn't have gotten in, at least not years ago now. I'm trying to learn what I didn't learn in high school, but I'm going to keep at it. Okay, now the personal, you might get to the level, well, I was born to help others. I love my family and friends and would sacrifice for them. My self, capitalized self, is the capital SELF of all beings. In other words, a realization that you are really a part of the whole. Okay, socially, I seek the company of those who are higher or at least as knowledgeable as myself. The body is a temporary energy state. Its appearance is unimportant. Political, I want those to rule who are selfless and do so to serve the Republic. I want my country to help other countries. Law, the law is a universal and comes from a divine source. It naturally implements justice for all. Religion, there's unity to all religions. They all come from the same divine source. Science, I realize the ancient scientists knew that philosophy, science, and religion are one. They knew that matter was the lowest end of spirit and spirit the highest end of matter. Mathematical methods can prove the truth. Spiritually, all beings are one. The human race is divine and immortal, and we must live to save and enlighten all beings. Pythagoras, who said, rests easily, the race of man is divine. So when you're out of this state, at least you're really thinking, and I hope that people who've done theosophy at least get to this state, because one is at least very much better off in this state than in any of those lower states. And even though, of course, once one realizes one's in the cave, one is better off than someone who's never moved. Okay, now the final state, we've got to go there. Okay, there's no way we could really illustrate this, but Plato says the soul is the perceiver. It looks directly on ideas. So This is, of course, in Book 7 of the Republic. So here there's no personal self left. There's only the great capital SELF. Okay, we're all gods. We're not just seeking the company of gods. Okay, there's no more politics. They're simply philosopher kings who take their turn ruling because it's their duty. They would just as soon be contemplating the infinite, but they have to do their duty. Okay, divine and human law are one. If any of you have ever read Plato's Laws, some people misunderstand it when he says the laws of his republic can't be changed. Well, what he means there is that divine laws, like karma, for example, these can't be changed by a human jury or something of this sort. Of course, we are karma, but he thinks that in a real republic, that the divine and the human law will not be separated. Okay, and then finally, the exact science of mathematics realize numbers pre-exist the world, as do the aesthetics forms. The world are based on geometric structures. Now, of course, this is very important for Plato. If numbers did not pre-exist, then we would not be able to have an enumeration of worlds. And if structures geometrically, like based on the number pi, the 3.415 ad infinitum, that is the ratio of a diameter to a circle, we wouldn't be able to have circular planets that rotate. Then, of course, there's a very perfect balance in our solar system, which we know something about, although we don't know much outside our solar system. But it's very clear to Plato that numbers and the geometric forms, which are really arupa, formless, and they're not physical, pre-exists what finally became the physical world. Okay, finally, spiritual. We're all one, and we will return to the divine source, but we shall return to help those in the cave. So, in other words, as Plato illustrates in the Allegory of the Cave, when we would say in the Buddhist tradition, when the Bodhisattva first goes down to try to talk to the poor souls in a cave, they may simply laugh at him, or in the case of Christian tradition, they might crucify him, according to that story, or they may throw the person out because, they really think that they know it all and they're being threatened by what they thought they knew. And this is very disturbing. And so that person might have trouble, but he might be able to find maybe just one who listens and lead him out of the cave. And then he becomes a kind of a guide, according to the Greek Platonic Aristotelian tradition, or a phronesis, to lead someone, to show him the way. The person has got to make the ascent themselves. And as Professor Eyre says in the article, The Allegory of the Cave in Parapolitics, there's going to be suffering and pain in the ascent. It won't be easy, but there'll be tremendous reward in the ascent to have given up the ignorance of identification with the body and identification with the social world and materialistic science or dogmatic religion. So that is what is going to eventually lead us to a much higher state of being than we have now, in which, anyway, it is my assessment of the Allegory of the Cave. Now, I'm sure you have a great deal to add to that, or you may think differently. So why don't we talk about it? Okay, thank you very much for listening.
Yes, hello there, Judy and gang. Now let's see. I'm wondering if I can be. I don't see myself. Oh yeah, oh there we are. Okay. I just don't see myself on this screen here, but I see that I'm up there. Alrighty. Well, very good. Well, Judy, thank you so much for that kind of fascinating description of, using the four values of Plato and then dividing it into these seven categories of, the social, the personal, the legal, and those sorts of things, spiritual, religious, and then describing how at each of these levels there's a way to describe the mindset or the perspective or the view of an individual person who's, on their growth path, their like developmental path, like kindergarten, junior high, high school, graduate school. And you might think of it, I think of it in those terminologies, that they have a more kind of self-centered, selfish way of looking at all of these things. And then it eventually gets to a more abstract one we might say where justice is good, but then we get into this very etherealized perspective of just ideas and the soul. So thank you for that summary. I thought it was quite interesting. And let's see if we have some hand raised for some questions or inquiries about Judy's wonderful presentation right now. We've got a chat thing. A chat, okay. There we go. So Truth says, are we recording? We are. And Jairo mentions meeting notes. Okay. Oh yeah, and then so like Nathan said, thank you for the wonderful invitation and presentation to the law of the living. Yeah. And do you have anything else there, Vijay? I'm afraid to change the system here to not knock you out. I thought you were a machine there, Vijay.
I have a question.
Yeah, Jonathan, you have a question from here in the lodge.
Yeah, is that okay if I?
Yeah, come on up so we can see you better.
So, Judy, thank you so very much for your clear presentation and also the imaginative way that you kind of showed us how thought engages at all these different levels, from the ridiculous to the sublime, you could say. Now, with reference to the divided line, I got a couple of questions. One is, why is it divided? And like you said, there's a gap, and you said about Antascarna. I was wondering if you could tell us more about that. But I also have another question, is with reference to the idea of reincarnation, is there a way, I was wondering if you could kind of think that through for us from the perspective of the dianoia one, that's just immediately above the divided line. In other words, below the divided line might be like, who was I in my last life and all this stuff. But above the divided line might approach a reincarnation from a different perspective. But I was wondering if you could explore that.
Okay, the question you're asking, does the divided line give reincarnation a different perspective
Sure.
than we have without it? All right. Well, first of all, I think we need to think about what Raghavan says about it. Once you get to the state of A, B, then the BC is dropped totally. It doesn't exist anymore. It was an illusion that you lived through. And you can go on from there. You're now on the level of soul or the higher self. But if you reincarnate with some of the skandhas of a lower manas or worse, you are going to reincarnate at a level where you're going to still be struggling to get beyond the divided line. Well, someone is very fortunate if they're able to be born in a state of what is called AC, and they're very high on the pyramid of the human race because most of the human race is in the cave, as is exampled by the current world situation in which there are wars going on, in which people, even children, innocent people, are starving or suffering from wars, and no one is doing very much about it. And some people have billions of dollars and they keep it to themselves. So this is not, at the moment, a very good world. It's a world of a cave. But if one is fortunate enough to get above the divided line in a life, they may be fortunate enough to choose a life in which they're going to be able to develop to an even higher, maybe even, bodhisattva state or noetic state. And of course, ultimately, as in the voice of the silence, the bodhisattva returns to help those suffering in the cave. And of course, help those who've gotten a little bit out of the cave and said, well, maybe there is something good about somebody who thinks differently than I do. I mean, that's only a beginning. It's certainly not the end. It's not unity, but it's getting there. So as I understand it, when they choose an incarnation, as Plato says, at the end of the Republic does so, of course, on the basis of what they've learned in the past life. And if they've learned very well, they're going to be born in a state of which they can continue learning. But if they're not doing very well, then they're not going to go very far in the next life. It's said, for example, that Odysseus or Ulysses learned so much from all the excitement of the Trojan War and then the Odyssey getting home. It took him 20 years that he chose the quiet life of a farmer. Now he could probably learn a lot more in that state than he did before. So at any rate, we have to realize that getting beyond the divided line, even if we're not quite adepts yet, is very important. And of course, it takes a lot of work to do that. It's like climbing out of any kind of a hole takes a lot of work, but it can be done. Plato insists, and any person can do it, as the Bhagavad Gita says, that chapter 6, that even someone who is as low as a woman, for example, can be enlightened. So, or an untouchable, or the Gita is very open about these things when you really read it correctly.
Yes, thank you, Judy, for bringing back that chapter 6 from the Bhagavad Gita and that distinction between the divine, godlike, and the demoniacal. Would we say that the dividing line is that same division, just in different language? The demoniacal being the world of opinions and the materialistic physicality of those reductionistic materialistic scientists, the opinions of the doctrinaire religiosity people versus the other godlike thing in the Bhagavad Gita, in the Gita chapter 6, talking about the world of reason, the mathematical understanding and the ideal forms. Is that really what that chapter is talking about?
I think Laura has got a question.
Oh, did you?
Oh,
Was she able to hear you?
oh, actually, let's see. Judy, can you hear me okay? How's this
Yes.
sounding? Okay, because I was sitting kind of away from this microphone. So I was wondering, I said, thank you for bringing back the idea of the Bhagavad Gita chapter 6.
16.
16, yeah, chapter 16. Thank you, Jonathan.
Yeah.
In which we had that distinction of the demoniacal on the one hand and the godlike or the divine on the other hand. And that Krishna is sort of dividing the world into sheep and goats, you might say. And so my question was, is that very much analogous? It seems like the answer is yes, analogous to the dividing line, that the lower world of opinions and of physicality, the reductionistic, materialistic scientists, is going to be the more demoniacal perspective. And then the other perspective of the godlike will be the one where we look at mathematics and the abstractions and ideas and forms.
Well, yes, that's why I thought that was an appropriate reading. I mean, the people are in the cave, who have the opinion that they are simply the body and they want to live all they can get. The materialists or the religious person. I actually once heard a visiting professor came to our university, and he actually said that it was a shame that certain primitive people, once having heard the gospel, didn't adhere to it, and they were going to hell. I tried to get to him and tell him that he was just a bigot to get out of our university. But I did. I was able to finally challenge him and talk to him for about 5 minutes and tell him that he knew nothing about all the religions he was trying to put down, because he said he didn't believe in pluralism, just his particular way of thinking. And I don't think this man realizes that although he taught in a theological seminary, that his viewpoint was very demoniacal. He thinks that there is one God that's going to send people who don't believe as he does into some horrible torture for eternity. I mean, it's just ridiculous. But yet, this is the view he held. And I think the Gita would say that unfortunately this person is of such a nature, and we would hope that he tries to go out of this, and that it's possible that he's got to change his views, and maybe it might take another lifetime to do that.
Yes, thank you. And on Fridays here in the San Diego Lodge, we go through the Gita, you might say with a fine-tooth comb, reading 2 to 4 verses per hour once a week on Friday. And so it was very wonderful to read chapter 16 all at once for me. And then to realize that one thing I've been, oddly enough, meditating on in the demoniacal perspective is a Roman Catholic funeral song called Dies Irae. It's been, you might say, on the Catholic hit parade for over 800 years. It's a Gregorian chant that used to be used at funerals until the 1960s, when the Romans Catholic people went to the vernacular language and they let go of the Latin. So in translating that funeral song, it turns out it does in fact talk about people being judged, and everything is going to be judged. There's going to be a harsh judge, and that the ones that are that are judged as guilty and sinful will be burning in hell for eternity. So this idea of burning in hell for eternity has been in European Christendom for over 800 years with this Roman Catholic funeral song. And it's funny, I was looking, because I've been, oddly enough, meditating on this and looking it up. And there's one guy on YouTube or the internet somewhere who says, even though he knows what the song's about, he still wants it. He's a Catholic man. He still wants that song performed at his funeral. And it's like, okay, this is interesting. And of course, the song is also imploring, God and Jesus, Jehovah and Jesus, to save him from the cinders and the ashes and the flames and the eternal fire. So, as humanists and as theosophists for 100 years now in Theosophy with Blavatsky and The Secret Doctrine, you might say 100 years is not really all that much time, and not as big as I think there's 2 billion Roman Catholics on the planet today. So our little goal here is like, how do we get above the dividing line? And one idea, and I don't know what you think about it, Judy, is the idea that by having these small study groups, our different lodges, and William Quinn Judge was I forget, was it about 150 lodges, Jonathan? Yeah, William Conn Judge set up quite a number of lodges, that these small study groups can be groups of people where we can like rally around the idea that no, we don't want to believe in this 800 plus year song and belief system, and the idea that we have only one life, and move forward. And we'd say these small groups are a powerful force. Jonathan.
I don't know. I know that we're having trouble with the computers, but there's two people with their hands up. Can you see who they are?
Not from the way I'm facing.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, because I can't see it on here at all.
Look up there.
I have to look around.
Laura's the first one and then somebody else.
Yeah, okay.
Yep. Hi, Judy. Thank you very much for the contemplation on Plato's cave. You know, there has to be an importance to the cave. And Mr. Judge, in his letters that have helped me, he said it's the important thing is to develop the self in the self. That's the self with the capital letter S. And in the self with the small letter S. And I'm thinking that that small letter self is the cave itself. And he says further on in the same letter, we look inside the glove and there is darkness. Then we have to go inside and see that, and so on and so on. It seems that once we know that we are the self, that it seems that we have an obligation to the cave, so to speak. We have to enter back into it. And what would be the importance of entering back into the cave, into the lower self? That we could think of it as the noetic. And HBB says that, you know, don't enter the psychic until you have blended the mind with the heart, or the buddhi manas, and then it is safe to go into that psychic nature. So what is all meant by that, do you think?
Yes, the importance of re-entering the cave is being inquired about in, you know, developing the blending of the mind and the heart. Well, I think before one re-enters the cave, one has to be ready to re-enter the cave, because they're going to get a lot of flack from people who think that you're just foolish because you're not adhering to their conventional ways. But just to bring in what Ken said previously, like for example with the Catholics, there are many people throughout history who challenged the Catholic beliefs, and many of them got burned up for it, as if, you know, they got temporarily burned at the stake. They weren't going to burn internally. And I do know Catholics who have, for example, embraced the idea of reincarnation. Well, I tell them they may, because the Orthodox bishops condemned Origen, the church father that believed in reincarnation, but the Catholic bishops didn't. So I know some very, open-minded, wonderful Catholics. I mean, Father Damien was one of them.
Yes.
Father Gregory Boyle, who works in East LA at this very moment, is another one of them. I've been in his presence, and he is really like a saint. So I think we can say that the getting rid of the little self, that's why you, according to Ragavan's equation, you drop the D and C. Once you've done that, then you can realize that you were once one of those poor slaves down in the cave. It reminds me of the advertisement for the Shumash Casino. It shows you a slot machine and says, "Welcome to freedom." You're like, you're going to get hooked on the slot machine, and that's freedom. Well, of course, I mean, that's tragic. Or get hooked on gambling, which is a terrible disease. It helped destroy my family. I know it because my father had such a disease along with alcoholism, and that's destroyed many families.
Yeah.
You know, as a psychologist. So I think the realization once you have it, I mean, you don't say, oh, now I'm just so great and powerful. I'm going to have nirvana for myself. I deserve it. Or it's the voice of the silence says, no, you have to reject that and take the secret path of woe and go back into the cave, until the whole human race becomes enlightened, as the Pledge of Kuan Yin says. Never shall I enter nirvana. Never will I enter into final peace alone, but forever and everywhere I shall live and strive for the redemption of every creature upon this earth. Well, that's going to take a very long time. It might take kalpas without number, as the Lord says. So I think that's very important. So once you've gotten the state of really having dropped any of the lower manas or personal desires, then you could really go and teach. Otherwise, excuse me, you could get in danger of being pulled back, I think. And there are those who have failed. It says HPB wrote a very interesting article about Cagliostro, who was a Masonic adept, but it said that he failed in his mission and perhaps he wasn't quite ready. But, he went pretty high, but he eventually got pulled down by the wiles of the Catholic Church. But I mean, not all Catholics I found are really lost in this literal idea of hell. There are many, who think it's the state of consciousness that we can get out of. There are all sorts of different type of Catholics I've met.
Very much so. Yeah, I thank you, Judy and Laura, for that interesting discussion about the small s self and the capital S self, the divine nature, and sort of the Bodhisattva vow, which is really that Trikaya doctrine of, yes, we can reach these high points, but then it is our responsibility to help others, but also realize that you have to be careful. And even I think St. Teresa de Avila warns about that. Now I see a hand up from Arun next. Arun, do you have a question or comment to share with us?
I've got both a question and a ceremony. God, that you would be honored by it, oops, glorified, that you would be lifted up. That's not me. Just to this day. I have got a.
Okay, Arun, I don't hear you too clearly.
I have got a comment and a question.
Oh yes, that's better.
Okay. I went to watch the movie The Odyssey a few days ago, and I thought that was quite a different movie from any other sort of Greek war type movie, because that one was largely about values. And what you got in that movie was a bit about religious values and spiritual values. And I just thought that there should be more movies like that to at least, we've got so many Christian movies of what you call Christendom. But this one gives a little bit of a different perspective on the whole thing. But my point here is, how important do you think it is to read Greek and to understand some of these concepts? Because we've got so many words like Plato's Haven or Plato's Cave or some other words that are used for the same thing. And Plato himself went into great detail with some of the rational breakdown. I mean, Nietzsche, for example, read Greek and seemed to have understood a lot of Greek philosophy very well. But that's just my comment, because I know we haven't got those classicists anymore who study Greek and try to understand in the original.
Well, like, how important is it to read Greek? Well, when I was in religious studies graduate school, they were always stressing the importance of, can you handle the original text? So I studied Greek, Latin, French, and German, Sanskrit. Well, my Greek isn't very good. I learned a little Greek, but it did help. But what I did get from learning Greek, like, for example, as I was saying about the term pistis, the root of epistemology, can be translated as faith or knowledge. And of course, if the Bible had been translated, the just shall be saved by knowledge, wouldn't that be very different than Martin Luther's doctrine of sola fide? which became to dominate the Protestant Christian world. That it's just faith and it doesn't have any knowledge to it, any science in the broader sense. So I think learning the original language is very good if you're going to go deeply into these ideas. And of course, it's recommended in Theosophy that we learn as much Sanskrit as we can. We learn Sanskrit words, terms. Some people give their children Sanskrit names as opposed to Hebrew-based names or Greek-based names. Well, okay, that's not as important as, reading a text in the original. Now, I can read German, and that's the only language I have any fluency in other than English. I can read French a bit, but I can't speak it. But I know, for example, Nietzsche was an incredible genius, and he wrote The Birth of Tragedy from the Spirit of Music, which I think is one of his best essays about Greek tragedy and its importance in the Apollonian, the Dionysian. And I really thought that was a very important essay. I read it when I was very young. I was about 17, I think, when I read it. And yes, I think there's a great deal to be said about this kind of scholarship, which is still very extant in European education, of course, where they learn a foreign language from elementary school on. Well, we don't in the United States, and we should, especially in the California school. I think we should learn Spanish. I think it ought to be required, but it isn't. And at any rate, education is going more the way of, let's be practical so you can get a job. And now AI is coming on. There's not going to be as many jobs. So there are going to be a lot of problems. People might eventually go back and say, well, there's more to life than just getting a job and having pleasure and going to the bar on Friday afternoon and saying, thank God it's Friday. There might be, because that's kind of demoniacal in my view. Okay.
Yes, indeed. That is demoniacal and that selfish, self-centered thing. Now, I do see another hand from John. John H. You can go ahead and unmute yourself and share a comment or question.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Judy, for very enlightening and stimulating talk. I was wondering if ambitious politicians who are addicted to power, the more they get, the more they want. They want people to stay in the cave. They want to have them change their seats. And with the arrival of social media and all the electronic things that are complicating and sometimes corrupting our lives, there are more opportunities for this kind of political brainwashing to keep people in the cave. It seems like it's an important societal challenge and educational challenge, and I was just wondering if you could comment on that.
Yes, that is a very good question about the influence of social media. And there is a current politician who's very powerful. When he was first running for president, he said, I love the uneducated. Now, I guess that was supposed to mean he has some sort of love for the people, which we know he does not. But at any rate, the more people are kept hooked on media. I remember once someone came up to me in a parking lot, and I admit I was wearing my martial arts gi and I was going in to exercise, but she said to me, do you read? And I said, yes, in fact, I'm a professor. I mean, I'm not illiterate as a professor. And she said, well, I've got some books I could give to the bookstore. Would you like them? I said, well, not those, but maybe someone else in the school would. So I invited her in the martial arts school, and somebody wanted these novels. She had to give away to the used bookstore that didn't want them. But I mean, I thought that was a little bit shocking for somebody to say, "Do you read?" Because most people in the United States are now literate, but a lot of people are just watching tube all the time, and they're not reading, or they're reading just their cell phones. And of course, unless you cross-reference these different medias, you're not going to get anywhere near like the truth. And it might be better just to avoid media altogether if possible.
Mhm.
Although some people like me, I like sports and drama too much to totally avoid it.
Yeah,
But
that
yes, it
is.
is true. Media could really keep us in the cave. Give us not a very good perspective on life.
And Judy, one word from the 1900s is propaganda. As I don't hear that word spoken very much or talked about on memes or media in this century, but in the 1900s, after the Cold War and during that time, and with Hitler and whatnot, we did talk about propaganda or deliberate disinformation campaigns, and I think it is important to guard oneself and to have like an outer guardian and inner guardian to protect our minds from these influences of the social media. Or even in the 1800s, there was this thing called yellow journalism that was kind of popular to kind of make things seem more exciting and dramatic, but really focusing on the negative things.
Yes, I think Robert wanted to ask about John. I guess before Robert, I can see what you can't, I guess.
Actually, yeah, my screen is that. So besides John, there's one other who is up there.
Robert.
Oh, Robert, yeah, Robert, yeah. Let's have another question or comment from you, Robert.
Well, Judy, you addressed the ignorance associated with the cave. I might mention, in fact, that the philosopher Simone Weil said that the movie theater, was an instance of how much we love our imprisonment. But I had a question about the other use of the cave, like it's that the Buddha taught his esoteric doctrines in caves, and then you have the tradition of the Pueblo people, to go underground for their meetings, and so I wonder what your thoughts were about this other side of the cave, where we
Yes.
can access our true self, perhaps, or it's helpful to access our real self.
If I understood the question, I mean, the thoughts about the other side of the cave.
Yeah, as a place to go for reaching the spiritual, not being captivated by the appearances of the world.
Well, yeah, you can use the term cave in a different way, like the ascetic might retire to the cave to meditate and become enlightened, but then once he does, according to Plato, of course, in the Mahayana Buddhist teaching, he should return to those who are in the different type of cave, the cave of avidya,
Right.
ignorance, and try to help those who are weaker selves. As Laura was saying, you've got to give up the small s self
Hmm.
for the larger s self, to the all capital S self. And that is really when you have gotten in a state of noesis. But it's very hard for us who are not on a very high level yet to verbalize that state. But we need to have compassion for those who are in a state of avidya, and we have to go. Well, for example, even in the Christian gospel, Jesus went and dined with the sinners. He didn't eat with his disciples all the time, the more enlightened. He went down and to the Boweries and ate and talked with the people who were really in a bad way. And this is one reason I'm very much an admirer of Father Gregory Boyle, whatever his religious beliefs are. I know someone who knew him personally, and he rejected a job at the University of Santa Clara, pretty nice job for a Jesuit priest, and went to the poorest parish in East LA. And he has done nothing but try to save people who everyone else said, oh, they're just trash. You can't help them. Well, there many of his students were at UC Santa Barbara. That's where he spoke. Many of his former students became very successful and had happy family life. And he admits to failures. He said he'd done 300 funerals of young people and he couldn't do any more. And there's a lot of shooting, a lot of violence. But of course, he's very much respected because he's a priest. And I think he's what Theosophists would call a blind Shylock. He is working for the true benefit of humanity, whatever his religious beliefs are. But as I said, I've known Catholics who have very different beliefs than their dogmatic religion would have them really believe. And I've said, go ahead, go for it. I've always tried to encourage people in whatever tradition they were, especially what I was teaching.
Yes, Judy, that's a very, I say, enlightened perspective, and it really goes along with the objects of the secret of the TS, the second object, to study about different world religions, and in some way, kind of respect the good that they can do, and and even people adhering to those particular existing world religions can develop a broader perspective as they move above the dividing line and become, in their own path, more godlike, more divine-like in that dividing line perspective. Well, let's see if there's any last minute questions or comments. Vijay, could you open the chat for me? Because I can't do it on my machine. We've had some last minute questions. It looks like a long chat. So here we have something from Laura. Thank you, Laura. I'll just read
Yes,
this.
I've already commented on that.
Oh,
That's
okay.
for anyone that wants to look, it's on page 39 in letters that have helped me. And Mr. Judge describes the cave as a dark glove that in order for us to understand it, we have to go inside, so to speak. But, we have to go inside, as Judy said, from the position of the Buddhi Manas, not from the position of the personal self. And then we can go into the cave, and with the light of the higher shining through the lower.
Yes, thank you for that. And that's a very evocative image of going into a glove or going into a cave and having the right mindset and being developed enough to make that inner journey. Well, thank you all. Let's go ahead and close up for today, and just a little pitch for next Saturday. Self-surrender on August 1st will be the discussion. And the Hermes quote there is, "Work and discipline can be exemplified in an Aquarian mode as a form of silent worship and spontaneous sacrifice." And with that, thank you again, Judy, Professor Salzman, for a wonderful presentation, very clear, concise explanation, and a delightful discussion.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Dr. Campo. It's good to have a psychologist on this call. Okay.
Hear, hear.
All right, thank you, everyone.
And Jonathan has a last comment. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you for coming, Nancy.
All righty.
Okay. Goodbye.
Okay, goodbye all.
Thank you.
Bye.